All right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the internet, and for those of you joining us in the theater of the Museum of Glass today. This is our monthly series that we do a hybrid interview and then also a performance. And today we have the great pleasure of having the wonderful trombonist and master musician Dan Marcus with us here today to talk about his life in music and also to do some playing with us later on. Dan, thank you for joining us.
Hey, it's good to be here, Kareem.
Yeah, I have known you for many years, more than either one of us would probably care to say. And you've been a driving force and hero of mine in the Northwest here on the music scene, and your associations with many great organizations. And I know that many people, if they've been aware of live music in the Northwest in the last 10, 20, 30, 40 years, have seen you play in one capacity or another, not only here but also around the world with different artists and groups. So can you talk about a little bit about how you got started playing in music before coming to the Northwest? You're from California, correct?
Yeah, I was born in Oakland, and hi, folks. And pardon the bass resonance. I'm still getting over I came back from Anaheim, and all I brought you was this cold. But I'm from Central California. I was born in Oakland, raised in the Bay Area. My dad's was a woodwind player, and his mom was a keyboard player, organist, and so music goes all the way back. Her mom was a violinist on both sides of the family. And so my dad would play with traditional jazz, West Coast traditional jazz groups, Dixieland groups, and when I was 8, they had me. We had bands starting at 4th grade in California back then. So you'd go in for the first day of band, and they lined us up and said, and get up to the table, and they say, okay, go. And so I went, and they said, great, trombone or trumpet, tell us tomorrow. Next. So I went home to my old man, and I said, they want me to play trombone or trumpet. What do you think? And then just one of his many times of questionable advice, he said, well, there's a lot of our trumpet players. You probably should play trombone. So that's how I got started on the instrument. And then we go out to the clubs where he was playing, or, shaky, straw hats, whatever it be. And he'd have me bring my horn. And he'd bring me up on stage, and he'd say, okay, listen to the first time around, play on the second. And that's how I learned to play, was just hear the tune, and figure out what to do and make lots of mistakes. And, he always made it real comfortable, like there are no mistakes, it's just learning. So anyway, so I went to Half Moon Bay High School, and it was an agrarian small town out south of San Francisco. And the one thing that Half Moon Bay had, as far as culture, was there was a club called the Bach Dancing and Dynamite Society, run by a guy named Pete Douglas. And it was just a straight bike ride from where we lived to the Bach. And so every Sunday, I'd ride my bike out to the Bach. And Pete was really cool. You had to be 21 or over, but he had a place up in the kind of the attic on the second tier for me to sit. So I was out of the way, and I wasn't bothering anybody, and and that was my spot. And so every Sunday I'd be up there, and I'm hearing amazing people, Frank Rossellino, Bobby Hutcherson lived in Montera. God, it goes on and on. All the people that I got to hear between 72 and 76, and learned a ton,
That's amazing. I want to ask you more about your early influences, but as trombone players, or people always hear about, J.J. Johnson, Jack Teagarden, Curtis Fuller, but trombone players know about Frank Rossellino, but that's kind of under the, kind of like Hank Mobley for saxophone players.
Sure. Yeah.
So what was it like did you know at the time as a trombonist that Frank Rossellino was Frank Rossellino, or he was just a great trombonist to you?
I didn't even know who he was the first time I heard him play. Yeah. They said Frank Rossellino's going to be here. I remember Bill Berry was, Bill Berry, trumpet player, cornet player, and Frank Rossellino was going to be playing, and I said, hey, could I sit in? 14 or something, and he goes, I think they're here to hear him. So I sat up there and got schooled. And then it was Carl Fontana. I was also fortunate to, because my dad taught psychology, but he taught at Skyline College, where there was a guy named Billy Robinson who was a trombone player, and he had a group called the Bay Bones that was a classical and jazz trombone choir, and I got to be involved with that really early. And I was in the jazz crew too, and that was 16 Bones. And one time, when I was about 15, we had Bill Watrous and Frank Rehak come in and play, and that was an eye opener. So I was just fortunate to be able to hear stuff early, and to hang with my old man and get a chance to play, and yeah. So I mean, that's a lot of it is exposure, and it's stuff where a lot of these cats are long gone, So
I'm curious, with both of your family, your folks doing music, were there certain things on heavy rotation as you were growing up, aside from the live stuff? Like they play music in the house on the regular? Or?
Oh yeah. My old man basically plays hefty. The Chet and Jerry stuff was just on constant rotation, he was real into Birth of the Cool. It was a trip. My first two albums were, when I was like 5, were Snoopy versus the Red Baron by the Royal Guardsmen and Papa's Got a Brand New Bag, by James Brown. And music all the time, piano in the house. Music all the time.
So then, obviously, you have strong roots with music with your family at home, and then band in school, to speak of. I mean, elementary, you said 4th grade you started, and then middle school, high school, all in the same town? Yes?
No. I was in South San Francisco, San Bruno, and our band director was a guy named Rudy Salvini, who some guys in the Bay Area will remember that name, trumpet player. He had a big band with Benny Barth. They're both gone, and so that was kind of cool. But when I got to high school, there really hadn't been a strong program in Half Moon Bay. But it was sort of like a boa constrictor ate a muskox. There was this glut of good musicians that all came through in the same time period, so that the band really burgeoned. And I'm still tight with some of those guys, from all the way back.
Well, so you mentioned being able to sit in with your folks and play. As you started getting more musical prowess and more experience, when did you start putting gigs together or doing jam sessions and things in high school? Were there clubs and venues to play?
Real book jams mostly, because Half Moon Bay was really remote, But you get up to the San Francisco, you go to the Great American and go see Don Ellis or the Pie Strip Band or those kinds of things, Buddy. We'd make field trips when we got our wheels, and then from there, I was going to be a physics major, and so I went into UCSC, and I won't go to the long version, but I got blown out of that whole idea real quick. So I went to Cabrillo and studied with Ray Brown, trumpet player, for 2 years, and that was great because all I had was practicum basically. I just had my ears. Ray made me start to learn some theory, and practice scales, altered dominance, Lydian dominance, and all that. But I was still very much an old school, out of the swing, early bebop thing. That's where my ears lived and still live. But it was great because Santa Cruz had a killing jazz scene in those days. We had a rehearsal band that was really a writer's band where we had Ray and Rich Fenno and Jackson Stock and Dave Eshelman they'd write charts for the bands called the Steamship Company bands, kind of like Tula's, that kind of thing, or Greg Williamson's band where it was a writer's band. So every week we were running through new stuff and soloing, and Donnie McCaslin came out of that thing. His old man was a vibes player. Had a band called Warmth, and they played down at the Cooper House, and Donnie, now Don, which came up in that. So it's just kind of the natural thing. But his old man was great. Don Chasm was a unique cat.
Well, being down in California, you mentioned a lot of folks that were in your sphere of influence, and I know over the years you've got a chance to play quite a bit with Pete Chrisley. Did you ever cross paths with him when you were coming up, or was that not yet?
That came later. That certainly came later. I when I moved after I left Santa Cruz, I moved to I got hired to work at Disneyland, the All-American College Singers and Show Band. It was a very short-lived version. It wasn't the marching band. We were actually stage performers. So that got me down to L.A. and that was cool and learned a lot because it was an educational thing. You still run into guys who went through that. I worked with Jeff Cashua this weekend and I didn't know that Jeff had also gone through that program. I was in '78, he was in '82. He's a lot younger. Yeah. And so from there, Joe Leach was at Northridge, and he kind of grabbed me, and so I went to Northridge for a while, and for less than a year. But it was great. I got to play in the 1 o'clock band or the A band, I forget what it's called. Again, great players, more exposure, and but I figured out pretty early on that LA wasn't my cup of tea. Yeah, I like trees too much.
Well, actually, you should have started with this. Actually, I always forget to do this, but we'd like to thank our sponsors for putting this together. That, of course, is the Museum of Glass, Ted Brown Music, KNKX, Titusville Cars, Tacoma Creates, and Edward Jones Financial Consultant Rick Gray. And we're going to conduct an interview for until about maybe quarter till, and then we'll open things up for questions. So if you have questions for Dan or myself, feel free to ask in person or put them in the comments, and we'll get to them. So I should have also started with many of the groups that you've been associated while you've, at least to my knowledge here in the Northwest, the Seattle Repertory Jazz Orchestra, Teatro Zinzanni, Bill Ramsey's, the Milt Cleve Ramsey.
RKO,
Yeah. Jay Thomas and the Cantaloupes.
Yeah.
The band you played with last night, many of the musicians from Chicago that come through. Tell me again
the California Transit Authority.
Thank you.
It's Danny Serafin, who was the original drummer for Chicago. They had a kind of a fission at one point, and Danny went off and did his own thing. But yeah, Jeff Coffey, who was the lead singer, and it's great. It's Andy Amdahl, Jeff Cashua, and me. We're they call them the horny Seattleites, or something. I forget what they called us, but
and also too. I mean, people have seen not just in pop or jazz realms, but if you've seen Broadway shows, you're one of the guys that's always in the pit making music for a lot of these shows and have been for years. I mean, this has been, and the other that you jogged my memory of, you said playing in a 16-piece trombone group. You're also part of a group here and there, the Trombonosaurus Rex.
Yes.
Correct? All right.
Yeah. When I feel like losing a couple $1,000, I'll book a couple of T-Rex gigs, Yes. But it's fun, yeah. And recently we've had an influx of really gifted younger trombone players, and so I was inspired to fire it back up, and we did a couple 3 gigs last fall. We'll see about getting some more going, but yeah, it's great. It's fun, Well,
so California, going to school, getting chops, and the academia and the ear, all that stuff together, and then playing with different venues. I wanted to ask you, and we talked briefly about this before the interview, but your association with Ray Charles and that band. When did that come into play? I mean, were there any milestones before that, or what am I skipping here?
I was at Northridge, and modal counterpoint just bored the hell out of me. And a friend, this Rich Fenno I talked about, said, I heard there's an audition for the Ray Charles Orchestra. You should go check it out. And I'm like, all right, okay. So I went, and I essentially crashed the audition. I wasn't invited or anything. And they come to this thing, Angel Eyes, 272. It was, I think it was 272. It was a trombone feature, and I'd been playing in wind ensemble at Northridge, and playing the alto trombone parts, but just playing on a tenor. So my chops were like meat, and so it was the right place at the right time. This guy walked into the room, and I leaned over and I said, "Wow, that guy does a great Ray Charles impersonation." And the guy says, that is Ray Charles, you hole. And I thought it was a ghost band. I didn't know Ray Charles was still alive. What did I know? I'm a kid. And so I baked Angel Eyes, and he goes, that's my new lead trombone player. And that was it. Done deal. So I got hired. I was 20, and I stayed out for 4 years, end of school career.
So we talked about this too. I mean, and you mentioned your association with Woody Herman. A lot of these road bands that probably safe to say we're not going to see that again anytime soon. I don't know. Maybe I hope I'm wrong. I hope I am.
Yeah.
But can you maybe talk about your experiences being in a high functioning road band with someone like Ray Charles and playing all over the world all the time? What was that like?
It was great. It was great. I mean, the thing we talked a little bit in before time. The thing that I didn't really appreciate at the time, but did in retrospect, was the people that I got to hang. The guys. My first roommate on the road was a guy named Johnny Coles. And Johnny Coles is a legend to those who know who he is. I mean, the closest most people get is from Mushmouth from the Cosby Kids. That was based on Johnny Coles, because he could topic dabbit. I can't do it very well, but. All those guys were Old Weird Harold and Fat Albert. They were all guys that were on Ray Charles Band at the time that Cosby was the warm-up act. So he who shall not be mentioned, I guess. In any event, so getting to hang and learn with guys like that, like Rudolph Johnson, who most people have never heard of, but if you heard him play, you go, oh my God. Ernest Van Trees, James Polk, all gone now. It's the depth of experience. How could I forget? Clifford Solomon, Cap, oh God, James Clay, Fathead. These cats were all Ray Charles guys, or worked on the band, and that experience is gone. It's gone. And so it's like again, I've got a cold, so my mind is kind of flipping all over the place. But I think about what my son Max is doing, where he's studying with David Conti in San Francisco at San Francisco Conservatory, because David was one of Nadia Boulanger's last students. So if you want to stay true to the French school, coming out of Nadia, and Ravel and so on, and that's as close as you're going to get. So I think it was a wise decision for him to pause his career as an educator and go get that experience while he could. For me, I didn't know that I was going to be fortunate enough. Aside from the world, seeing the world and all of that was great. But just to be able to hang with these guys and learn,
That's kind of briefly. I mean, we're talking about that before the interview, but a lot of these guys that were either the greats themselves or greats via getting information from the greats, they're passing on and. As I was mentioning, it's my opinion, like, this stuff needs to be documented so the information is not lost, because we can listen to recordings, and recordings are great.
Sure.
But it's, in my opinion, if you're trying to learn something, just go to the person and say, hey, how did you do this, or how are you thinking about this, versus guesswork,
Yeah, and even more just let them wash over you, People learning how to listen is an acquired skill instead of always having to, yak.
Well, so what was it like working with Ray? I'm assuming was Ray the musical director, or was there a musical director?
Clifford Solomon was the musical director. Cap was a sax player out of L.A., and he was Ike and Tina Turner's musical director, and he was he played with Johnny Otis, Shuggy Otis, Charles Brown. He played with Cannonball and Nat at the first Monterey. If you look at the video of Cannonball and Nat at the Monterey Jazz Festival, the third sax player, that's Clifford Solomon, and he was a beast. I mean, he's a great player, but the main thing he was just a super soulful guy and a gentleman and funny. And his birthday was just the other day on January 17th, and there's there's a closed Ray Charles alumni site, and we every January 17th it's all cap, it's all Saul. It's all about it's a pickup, and and just there's those of us who still remember who was important. He was important to me. I mean, he hired me. He pulled my coat. He kept me on the straight and narrow that first year when I didn't know squat. I was just some kid from Half Moon Bay.
Well, here's a question for you. In having those types of experiences versus, and you've been, like you mentioned earlier, a journeyman for your whole life doing this stuff in many different situations. What would be some of the differences in playing in that ensemble and what it was like versus, I mean, you're affiliated with lots of, and I'm not throwing anyone under the bus here, but you're affiliated with like SRJO or other big bands or groups. What would be some of the differences back then versus what it's like in 2025?
We've lost a lot, Hadley and Buddy and Lamphere and those guys. I mean, guys that go back where they go back in the history, of course, Rams. And I mean, I want to applaud you for what you did for Rams, for doing a tribute and a celebration as opposed to a memorial. That was and remains one of the hippest things that's happened around here in a long time, man. And yeah, there's we're all sound bites these days, It's all TikTok and whatever, and 16 seconds and everything. And there's a lot of depth out there that is overlooked. And it's it is what it is, but everybody's in a hurry. But yeah, just like working with Danny last night, last couple of nights, and playing that Chicago stuff. I mean, that was part of my formative years, was listening to Chicago and Blood, Sweat and Tears and Earth, Wind, Fire and Tower Power and Cold Blood and all these bands out of the 70s that were horn bands that changed it up. It wasn't all, getting sedimentary over you. All of a sudden, here's these bone players and horns that are like bringing it. Yeah. And I was lucky to grow up in the Bay Area and get to hear Tower Power in '73 and stuff like that. But yeah, Chicago. So to be able to play that stuff now, 50 years on, it's cool. It's music that has importance beyond 25 or 6-4 or whatever. It was a change. Don Ellis, and I mean I could go on and on, but Zappa. There was a change that happened, with jazz rock and with horn bands. And I was fortunate to be in the middle of that, and I hope that there's, I was talking to the singers the singers on this thing, Travis Davis and Jeff Coffey. I mean, they are full-throated. You hear the melody, right? There's melody there, and we were talking about what's happened to vocalists, what's happened to. And not to mention any names, but like Christina Aguilera, right? That's who came up last night. It's like, where is it? Where's melody? Where's harmony? All right, I'll stop. I rant.
No, I mean,
that was my rant.
I understand completely, and it's not a rant. I think it's a very valid question.
Yeah.
And we could spend this is like another 5-hour conversation just going down this rabbit hole. I mean, there's
A
lots
snark
of ground.
fest, yeah.
Yeah. Well, not really. I mean, just quality of. I mean, look at, and again, we're not throwing any stones here, but just comparison. You look at like Walt Disney films from 50 years ago.
Yeah.
You had a full orchestra. You had a full choir. You had people really learning their craft, playing instruments, real instruments. Now you have like one person on a keyboard, maybe, or it depends if they've got like a different type of pet project. They might involve some musicians, but not nearly at the level that it used to be.
No.
You had orchestrators and arrangers and composers, I guess you could strip it all down to money, sure, and say, well, they just don't want to pay that. But
yeah.
Again, there's many facets to this. But I think it's definitely a tangible difference that you can hear and as a listener feel, whether it's off a recording or in person.
Well, unfortunately, we're seeing the lowest common denominator win in a lot of places these days. So.
Well, we're here to talk about you.
Oh yeah, but more about me.
Yeah.
So.
Well, okay, so you're out with Ray Charles, 4 years, touring all over the world, and again, this is a whole other interview. We could just stay here, but I want to. There's more to the story here. So what happened after Ray Charles?
Got off the road, settled in Santa Cruz, got into the scene there, played a lot of salsa, a lot of bop gigs, and Santa Cruz was a great jazz town in those days until October 17th, 1989, when all the brick buildings came down, because we had the earthquake. And so I had already been looking to move north. We'd been in a drought for 5 years, and I liked the garden. And so I was talking to a partner, and we decided we'd move north and start a business similar to I had a day gig. We decided we'd start that business, so we moved, long story short, we moved to Bellingham and started this company, and it did well. And then my son was born, 93, and the decision was made to sell my part of the business and move closer into town, because pretty tough to do any kind of gig driving from Bellingham and back, So, but Bellingham was good, hooked up with Paul Barron up there. We started the Roadkill Jazz Rendering Service. Was a big band with locals up there. It was a lot of fun. And I was basically, when I moved up, I was kind of like done playing for a while. I figured, and I'd gone through things like that before in 88, 89. I kind of was done playing, and then I got the call to go out with Woody's band and said, "Oh, I'm not done playing. Let's go," and so. But I started to get the taste again, and work started to come my way. That's when I met like Brad Allison and Jay Thomas and all those guys here, and it's been 30 years of absolute bliss. And then I, of course, met Rams, and Rams started putting me to work, and yeah, it's good.
I know everything that you're saying. I know that there are some listeners that have no idea what you're talking about. So when you say Woody, you're talking about Woody Herman's band.
Yeah.
And so how long were you out with that?
3-4 months.
3-4 months?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was pretty much done by that point, or at least because Woody had just passed away, so it was kind of the ghost herd. And but it's something that I'd always wanted to play those charts, and so that was good. And then I left that. It was kind of weird how it all worked out, but after that was done, that was when I decided that, because I got back from being out with Woody, and 3 days later the quake happened, and in Santa Cruz, which was a hell of a ride, and so it was just time for a change. I had a good scene in the Bay Area. I was busy, but it was the same thing over and over.
For just the historical purposes of this interview too. So at that time in Santa Cruz, who was around on the scene? You said wonderful players and a good scene. So who were some of the folks that you were playing with down there at the time?
Oh man, Rebecca Franks, Donnie McCaslin. Donnie had moved on by then, come to think of it. And God, now I'm going blank. There was Full Faith and Credit Big Band was playing up in the Bay Area. John Worley, Brad Hecht. Got a bunch of people you're not going to go. Steve Bennett. I played, actually at that point, I played in a reggae band called the Square Roots, and that was a lot of fun. We played at Catalyst, whatever. It was a ska band, and pretty high powered, and had 3 horns. Danny Young and Geordie Holbert. People nobody's ever gonna know except Danny Young and Geordie Holbert, and Billy Patrone, and it was a cool hang. It was a different thing for me. I was body surfing all the time, and it was just a different hang. It was good, and but then it was it was time to do something else. Just felt it.
Well, you mentioned Rams, and of course you're talking about Bill Ramsey, and I know from as long as I've known him towards the end of his life, he was doing a lot of contracting work. So I'm assuming that he's able to throw a lot of stuff your way, and on your own merits too, you get things booked. But is that how you started doing work with like a lot of the Broadway shows? Because you do many of those.
No, that was it was nothing I ever had any eyes to do. I started a sub for Gary Schutz, who now lives in Florida. I didn't really have anything to do with Rams. Rams was like Centrum, Port Townsend and all that, and then a bunch of gigs. And then Rams and Milt had their 10-piece thing, and then Grover's Book and all that. But no, I just started subbing for Gary, and then Gary kind of just phased out, and I started getting the work, and Brad Allison kind of nurtured me as I kind of got my feet under me, because it really was nothing. It was not in my strengths, to read as much. I just didn't come from that background. And it was, it's not jazz playing, but the thing I found that I enjoyed about it was the precision, was the bringing style, because one of the things that that Brad and I come from, we go back a ways, right? So we know just intuitively styles, where it's not because you don't get a lot of hints from the written music. You just either know or you don't, right? And we've had a good time doing it. I mean, Brad and I have been side by side or front and back for 30 years doing this stuff now, or 25.
Coming from such a diverse musical background and from playing lots of different types of shows, this is kind of a tangent here. What would be one of your favorite shows to play and one of your least favorite shows to play, and why?
Well, I mean, Book of Mormon was the best show, the best musical. Only because watching the day when they would do the sign, the sign language stuff, if you know anything from Book of Mormon, and you're watching the people doing sign over there with, I can't even say some of this stuff, 168 F-bombs, and watching signers blush was a real peak moment for me. No, I would say that some of the most fun was the first iteration of Teatro Zinzanni, when it was Jay Thomas and Luis Peralta and Blaine Dunaway, and my brother Michael on bass, and of course it was run by Norman Durkee, who is a larger-than-life cat here in town, and it was the Wild West. He came from. Durkee came out of Monk and Nino Rota, right? So you put those two together, and it was a trip. And it was kind of anything goes. And then Wecon came in later when Peralta moved to do something else, and Milo Peterson was involved in that. I don't know. It was just that first year and a half was a lot of spontaneity. That's something that I really appreciate in everything, is spontaneity. Which is kind of weird doing musical theater, because it can't get a whole lot more rigid than that. But I've just always appreciated spontaneity in everything, in travel. We travel a lot, my gal and I, and I like, I'll have a structure. Like, we're staying here, but everything between here and there is, let's go see what we can find. Spontaneity in music and in art is, that's where the art is, I think. Yeah. Otherwise, it's just entertainment.
Well, I wanted to ask you, speaking of traveling again, you've seen a lot of the world. What was one of your least favorite travel moments? Like maybe a disaster that happened or something that's like, makes you question, what am I doing?
Getting arrested in was it Prague? No, it wasn't Prague. It was Sofia, but I got off right away. Yeah, we were in Poland and Bulgaria and the Czechoslovakia, the Czech Republic, during the Iron Curtain, and that was a trip. South Africa in '81. Ray went down and played under apartheid, within apartheid South Africa. There were some pretty sketchy moments there. He caught a lot of crap for that, but I still to this day think he did the right thing. He was adamant about mixed audiences or he wouldn't play, but yeah, going out to the square in Soweto on the anniversary of Bloody Sunday to play a gig, and nobody came. I mean, none of and a guy came up and said to us, "I'm sorry, it's joyful that you're here, but this is not a day for joy. This is a day for sorrow and for remembrance." And to have a conference, because I went out through the line of South African police with their Alsatian dogs and all that. Jay and I, the bass player, and we're talking to people, right? They're like, "Don't get off the bus," and young and stupid. It was powerful. It was a powerful moment, and I remember being up at top of Table Mountain in Cape Town and looking out at Robben Island. That was anyway. Yeah, there were powerful moments out there. I was kind of the underground road manager because I've always been kind of I wouldn't say a scholar, but I like to know where I'm going. So I'm reading Iberia before we get to Spain, and I'm reading, and we'd get places, Japan or whatever, and I get the guys together and say, "Okay, we're going to go to Hamamatsu. We're going to go to the let's go to see the Daibutsu." And they're like, "What?" And I said, "It's better than sitting around drinking in the hotel." Experience.
How was obviously the music, I'm assuming, was well received in the U.S. when you're traveling with Ray's band. How was it received in other countries?
Huge. He was huge in Japan, huge in all over Europe. In Italy, we'd play these giant hippodromes, and we're like 100 yards away from the crowd because their way of showing appreciation was to throw bottles at you. And if they really liked you, they threw more bottles. In South Africa, it was rock. South Africa is basically a country made up of baseball-sized rocks. And I remember we're playing in Sunderland or Funland or something like that, and somebody heaved a rock and took the guitar player out from the warm-up. It just, yeah. So I digress. Must be the Afrin. No, he was hugely popular.
What do you attribute that to? Do you think maybe that was Ray
Yeah.
Charles, but do you think just a different appreciation for performers and art in general, or your thoughts about it, your opinions about it?
The whole Ray thing was interesting because the band, he didn't need a band. He didn't need to travel with an 18-piece orchestra. We were there for him. That's how he liked to perform. He didn't care. Matter of fact, he made it a point to cut the sound off a lot of times if it was bothering him, and he just needed the band or wanted the band behind him to push, to catapult him. It's what he liked to do. So he spent a lot of money. Who knows why anybody's popular? He was brilliant, though. I mean, he was, to stay pertinent for 4 decades, something. And I liked hanging with him. You hear stories. He could chew on some guys, but never, not me. Well, I turned him into the union one time, but instead of firing me, he gave me a raise because I like your spunk. But we played chess a lot in the back of the plane, and I did arrangements for him and recopying some of the music that just over the years has just gotten completely feathered and cuts and stuff like that. So I made a little side bread doing that. I don't know. He was a unique cat. It was good to be with him.
You mentioned arranging, and I'm assuming composing too, given your background. So for books like when you do stuff with Jay's band, when you do performances from time to time, or like for Trombonosaurus Rex, do you do a lot of the composing and arranging for that, or? No.
Not really. About the only thing I've done recently was we had a 15-piece R&B band, funk and R&B band, for about 12, 15 years called Type A, and I did all the charts for that, for Five Horns and whatever. But no, I just I had a flood early on when I moved up here, and it wiped out all my charts. Kind of made me think about it with what happened in Pacific Palisades and Altadena, man. And like John Clayton, he just lost all his music, all his basses. Lewis Taylor, my good buddy Danny. I mean, it's sort of like when I lost all those charts, it was sort of like, kind of done. I never was much of a writer anyway. Yeah.
Well, so now, I mean, you're busy playing full-time, working a day job as well, but playing a lot. So Ray Charles moved to Washington, doing all these things. Are there any groups that I have not touched on that you feel should be mentioned of folks that you're working with currently?
Well, you got T-Rex, so that's the most important one. No, no, I just kind of, I love working with Jay whenever possible, just because I learn every time, There's other cats like that where it's Oliver Groenewald. That's one. That's the NewNet. That's a lot of it's been a lot of the same usual suspects, Brad Allison on trumpet, and then it was a 9-piece for the longest time. Oliver Groenewald lives out on Orcas Island, and he's a really amazing composer, a jazz composer with a classical background with a European aesthetic, and I love playing his stuff. And so it's John Hansen and Michael Glenn and Adam Kessler, and Jay plays sax in that one, and Ollie plays trumpet and flugel, and then we've got Travis Ranney, and I'm gonna start blowing it. The newest addition is Mark Taylor. We went to a 10-piece basically, so we could so Mark is in there now, and I'm forgetting somebody. I'm gonna hate this. Barry player. All right. Anyway, it's the Afrin. It's not my fault. But anyway, those are they're few and far between. But we're playing Seattle Jazz Fellowship. Thomas's thing in March. Okay. So, yeah, that's worth catching. It's like, we talked about those that have been and are gone, and I'll always be grateful that I and my son will always be grateful that we got to know Jim Knapp, and he got to study with Jim Knapp. I mean, we had an important musical. Composer and musical mind genius in our midst, right here. And, and so all I can say is that, take advantage of it when the opportunity is there to hang with somebody who's got some depth, go do it. Yeah.
Well, we still have some time here. At this time, I'd like to open things up for questions. If there's anybody watching via the internet that has questions, feel free to put the questions in the comments. We're happy to answer any questions about dark, seedy paths. Just kidding, just musically related questions, but happy to help. And in the meantime, I'm going to continue to barrage Dan with questions, so don't be shy. Okay, so California, Ray, up here in Washington, working with Oliver's band. A lot of clubs have come and gone. When you first came to the Northwest, you mentioned your associates with Rams. Were there other folks that you were working with regularly in the Pacific Northwest when you first moved up here? I guess down from Bellingham, I should say.
Another one that we lost that that was unique to this area was Red Kelly. Red and Donna Kelly, and Kelly's right down the road. I mean, I'd drive down here at the drop of the hat just to hang, And RKO played there, Trombonist Rex, but everybody, right? And it was a true jazz dive, like they just don't exist anymore, right? And for me, it reminded me of being at Dante's or Carmelo's or Yoshi, the old Yoshi's. Anyway, it was just it was so cool, and just the hang and it's funny. I'm tripping on like all the memories I'm remembering, Randy Lintott and Ted Bowden and Steve Mostovoy and people that were a part of the day in, day out experience here that aren't with us anymore, tragically. And I have this image of playing in a big band at Red's, at Kelly's, and here's Ted and here's Randy, and I'm getting old, man. I'm getting old.
That's why I like to have these conversations, is that we want the people that are here now around as long as possible, but to also learn these things and get the experiences and have these conversations so that people can have a better understanding.
Yeah.
Because a lot of this stuff gets, I think, overlooked in 2025.
Yeah.
I don't know. I agree with you, and a lot of the people that you mentioned. I mean, Jim Knapp was one of my professors at Cornish. Hadley was one of my professors at Cornish, and they're gone. And I learned a ton from those guys. But I guess it's also documenting the information so it doesn't get forgotten.
Like we talked about, my son is much more aware of the importance of historical record and of archiving things than most people, and certainly most people his age. And we talk about like he always wants to go back and look at our family trees, and all that. And I mean, is there a practical application to that stuff? Does it matter that his great aunt was a doctor in the Alaskan bush in the 1915s? No, but it's still important. Is it? I don't know where I'm going with that, but we're just too. We're too disposable, right? The whole society is just like the latest, the shiny objects and everything. I think that when I'm talking to students, younger students, about playing everything, and I'll take them back. Like, listen, this is West Montgomery. Okay, West Montgomery got to be West Montgomery by studying Charlie Christian and Django Reinhardt. Okay, here's Charlie Parker, but what's Charlie doing? Charlie's playing along with Benny Goodman on a 78, right? You've probably heard that, right? I mean, that's it. It's like, how you gonna you want to get good at something? Study. You got to go back and listen and take the time and invest the time, and it shouldn't be a hardship. It should be a joy. You're either into it or you're not. If you're not into it, cool, do something else.
Reminded me of someone I wanted to ask you earlier, but forgot to. So you mentioned Frank Rosolino, Carl Fontana, and your family's influences. Looking towards, Bill Watrous, the opportunity to see Bill. Looking after all the stuff you've done as a trombone player and brass player and a musician around the world, who are some trombone players that are modern trombone players that you think are pushing the trombone forward?
Oh boy. Well, in town here, Connor Eisenmenger, and Bezzy Tefesi are both good trombone players, right? And working it, and I honor that and respect that. And they were part of T-Rex. Interestingly for me, the guys I listened to coming up were Dexter Gordon, Sal Nistico, okay, Tal Farlow, Bob Brookmeyer. There was a trombone player in there, but Chet Baker, Jerry Mulligan, that's the stuff that caught my ears. But yeah, for young guys, I mean, I'm bad with names to begin with. Today I'm ridiculous, but there's some monsters out there these days. I mean, I get asked why I never recorded an album of my own. I can play. I'm a good player, but I don't feel like I have anything to add to the repertoire, right? Like the what am I trying to say? The evolution of the instrument or whatever. For me, it was just like I'd rather go to the Hoh rainforest and walk the Hall of Mosses. I mean, it's just I don't know. It's just not my thing.
Which jogs my memory, I believe. It's going to air in about 5 minutes, but if people tune into Jazz Northwest, they can hear you featured on a couple pieces with the Ramses Band.
I'm sorry.
If I'm not mistaken. What's the feature? It's Nobody's Heart? Nobody's Heart?
God, yeah, okay.
Yeah, anyways. All right, we're getting close to time. Are there any online questions? Any questions here in the audience? Okay.
Why would there be?
Well, Dan is.
Yeah, why'd you book this guy?
It's been a sincere pleasure having you as our guest today.
Thanks, Kareem, man.
Asking these questions that I've never known. It's great to get to know you better, and thank you for being here. So we're going to take a very short break for about an hour, then reconfigure, and then we're going to play some impromptu live music for you. So thank you so much for joining us today. If you want to support the work that we're doing, the majority of the work that we do throughout the year is 100% free in all ages. There's like 5 years of these YouTube videos you can go back and watch and check out if you'd like. But if you'd like to support the work, you can make a donation via Venmo or PayPal. The information is on the screen down below. And it's been a pleasure being able to do this for you today. Dan, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, dude. Thanks for having me.